The world has shrunk. We are in a period of remarkable tension.
Climate change and migration.
Emerging technologies.
Artificial intelligence.
Economic opportunities. Global health.
What is happening in Gaza.
Ukraine and Russia.
The situation in Sudan.
It's a messy world.
Mr. President, welcome to Chicago.
Chicago is a convergence of people and ideas and cultures from all over the world.
We are hoping that by listening to this conversation, we're then move into real advocacy and action.
Fight is about everyday work, about your everyday contribution. Even small steps matter.
We need to do something now.
This is about democracy.
Inclusion, real inclusion.
Listening to one another. What do you see as the path forward?
Good evening. Quite a crowd. Welcome. Welcome, Alex.
Thanks, Patrick.
It's a pleasure to be here with you all today for a momentous occasion to launch Alex's new book, The Courage to Continue. Before we get started, I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Patrick Shewell. I work just down the road in Fulton Market for a huge company called Mondelez International. For those that are less familiar with us, I'm sure you'll know our brands. You might not know our company history. We were spun off from Kraft about 12 years ago. We're a $40 billion biannual revenue company, and our brands include Oreo, Chips Ahoy, and Sour Patch Kids. So hopefully most of you enjoy those snacks. And just given the price of cocoa at the moment, if you could enjoy a few more this year, that would really help. Make sure I get a bonus next year. But we're proudly headquartered in Chicago. We used to be up in Deerfield. We moved down to the city, intentional to try and grab some of the great collegiate talent in the Chicagoland area. And I work and have the privilege of working in sustainability. So I report into our corporate impact organization as part of our corporate and gov affairs function. And my role is I lead global sustainable packaging. So what does that look like on a day-to-day basis? Well, I'm really fueled by driving impact, positive change that has a positive impact on people and planet, but also at the same time really fueling the growth agenda of our company. So how do we link doing the right thing, having a social and environmental benefit with really fueling sustainable long-term growth for our company and value back for our shareholders? And we're working really hard, and we can dive into this during Q&A because I want to certainly give plenty of time for this lady to talk about her wonderful new publication. But we are really proud to be at the forefront of driving progress towards a circular economy for packaging. So what that means is that ideally, we don't want our packaging to become waste. We want that packaging to be collected and recycled or reused in a circular flow. And what that drives is a lot of environmental benefit, but it drives significant commercial benefit as well, not just for us, but it drives economic progress across the US and the other markets within which we operate and sell our products. So that's enough about me. I'm now going to introduce you to Alex Kruzel, who I think is a familiar name and face to most of you in the room and most of you online as well. So Alex is an entrepreneur, a CEO, a sustainability expert, now an author. Congratulations.
Thank you.
But for me, I'm proud to say that Alex is a friend, she's an inspiration, and she's a mentor, and someone that I think really role models what it means to have a career of impact. She's also a board member of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. We got introduced about a year ago by one of the great leaders in Chicago, Paramita Das, who may be a familiar name to some people in the room. And we immediately struck up this great friendship around common passions. So food first, of course, family second, and then really around sustainability, the corporate sustainability agenda, driving progress around that, but also policy and government affairs. I'm a poli-sci undergraduate, had a career in government and pivoted to the corporate world pretty quick because I didn't survive well in government. It wasn't dynamic enough for where I was back then. Maybe it's something I'll pivot back to when I've calmed down a bit later in life. But common areas of interest really then fueled what's become a phenomenal friendship. And I have to say, I'm really proud to see what Alex has done as a leader, but also what her team at Telesto Strategy continues to do, which is work with the public and private sector to really integrate sustainability into the corporate agenda and drive impact, but at the same time, drive profitable growth for companies both in the US and Fortune 500 companies globally as well. I think for me, what the Courage to Continue demonstrates is Alex's steadfast commitment to progressing business strategies and global policies that fuel sustained profitable growth while amplifying sustainable impact across business and across the private and public sector. So congrats, Alex, for producing what I think is a really pragmatic case for staying the course. For me, I think this framework is something that's going to guide me over the next few years on becoming a better leader in sustainability.
Thank you for that, Patrick.
So before we dive in, I've got a few questions that I'm going to ask Alex, but before I dive in, just to share with you a few ground rules for today's discussion. So first of all, we want it to be interactive. We have some questions that I prepared. Alex is hopefully going to give us some really great answers that are going to be provocative and provoke some thoughts and questions. We want it to be interactive. So I think you should all have access to the Q&A platform. If you can't remember the URL, it's ccga.live. So if you log into that now, we'll take questions throughout the course of the discussion. We'll try and take those in the moment. So we'll intentionally pause and take those questions. We'll also have 20 minutes of dedicated Q&A at the end. So for those online, continue to pump in your questions via the online platform. And those in the room will set up a mic in the middle so you can just queue up and ask your question live in person. Or if you're too shy to do that, you can run it through the platform. And if you're too shy to do either of those things, then you can speak to Alex afterwards, because she's kindly agreed to stick around and sign books for those that are interested in taking a copy home with them tonight. Good. So with that out the way, let's get into it. So Alex, my first question is the softball one, because you get to talk from your heart.
Sounds good.
Tell me, what is it personally and professionally that inspired you to write The Courage to Continue?
Yeah. Well, it's not just maybe the moment of today. I think this is honestly years in the making. Our country has been through a lot, some ups and downs, and we've gotten to a place professionally, even personally, where day-to-day conversations can be hard. And maybe it's a buzzword to say we're polarized, but we're disconnected at the very least. And we have a hard time then finding some middle ground. In my field in corporate sustainability, we've worked for decades to try to get to the equation you talk about. How do you think about environmental sustainability? But how do you think about business growth at the same time? And we've gotten to a better place. We've been more successful in recent years. And with policy direction changing quite drastically, it could be very tempting to say, you know what, maybe we should pause. Maybe these investments don't really matter when it comes to energy, when it comes to waste, when it comes to sort of common sense things that when you look at polling, 90% of Americans want clean water, clean air, food security, right? These are some common sense, no-brainer sort of things. When we saw President Trump come into office, we knew there would be a lot of changes. But I don't think many who I've talked to at Department of State, Defense, the Treasury, and in my day-to-day work with corporates, they didn't realize it'd be so quick and so wide and so deep. So I really looked to start this project right around Inauguration Day, actually, because I thought, you know what? We need a space to come together in a different way. And when I was looking for feedback behind the scenes from different board members, different clients, different thought leaders, people I respect, I asked, what do you think? Tell me, is this a good idea? Is this something that would be helpful to you? Nonpartisan, technocratic framework to say, should we or should we not stay the course? I offer a rationale as to why, but I had to check my own bias at the door too, right? Because I came in with, of course, we must, but I wanted to make sure I actually checked that too. And so what I heard actually surprised me a little bit behind the scenes when I asked a lot of trusted individuals, what do you think? They said, Alex, this meets the moment. I encourage you to keep going, but I kind of need you to do this for me. I'm in a place it's hard to speak out publicly. And now's not the time for me to maybe take the risk. And so for me, I'm willing to. For me, it matters. We need an opportunity to come together and say, why would a country stay the course on sustainability?
Yep. And what I would reflect on working in a large global company is this is the pivot that we're seeing is you can't lean into an emotional conversation about it's the right thing to do. What you have to be is pragmatic. So what's the actual business case? What are the returns for the business from being more sustainable, right? Because the idea that we can drive infinite growth with finite resources is nonsense. So we have to find sustainable pathways forward, but we have to do it in a pragmatic way that we create economic opportunity. There has to be a financial case. There has to be short-term, mid-term, long-term payback on those investments. And I think that's what Alex, with this book, has kind of carved that path for that conversation to happen, which is, the bipartisan discussion around what is that case to continue? Where do you double down and drive investment in order to advance the domestic and international agenda?
And it's on the policy side too. And if we think about what we're trying to do here, it's also about national security. So most presidents have their whole of government approach on something. In this case, for President Trump, it's a whole of government national security agenda. So I stopped back and said, okay, what's the policy angle here? How could this fit in or not fit in, right, with what he's trying to do? And not he, but the administration, right? I want to be respectful to all sides here. And with that, I sat back and think, well, actually, environmental security is the missing piece. That's been a piece of the puzzle for many, many years. And maybe let me take a step back. What is environmental security, right? I think about it kind of like, this might be esoteric, but bear with me, 19th century Europe in the United States. And we had medicine that was looking to protect humans. National security, right? We try to protect a country. Same, again, that similar sort of logic. And in the mid-19th century, for the first time, people said, wait, actually, if I wash my hands, my patients do better, actually. Germ theory was discovered. A special nod to my older sister who's been talking about this to me for years. This is her field of work, so thank you, Emilia. But that made major changes because that brought in, all of a sudden, we learned germs. Those things make people sick. It's bacterial. It's not because of the cosmos, which is what people thought, attributed some disease to prior, or something that was airborne. It was bacterial. And so, in that sense, medicine changed. The rules of medicine all of a sudden became different overnight. You can't unsee or unlearn those things. And to be a successful doctor, you had to have a doctoral view of the whole body, of the whole patient. So what does that mean for national security and environmental security? Well, if you want to be nationally secure, you have to think things about water, right? For industrial use, which is massive. For instance, data centers in this country use as much water as the city of Hong Kong. You need access to food. We need access to critical minerals. We need air to breathe, very simple things. And if we don't have them, if climate disasters get worse and cities don't have first responders that can manage, which has been sort of the growing trend, we need our military to step in to make sure we are secure. So to me, when I was really taking a step back and thinking about, I really do believe there's a clear linkage here, and it's just not me. It's even Republican presidents, starting with Theodore Roosevelt, who said, I love the great outdoors. That's how I kind of remembered him, but digging into the details, he was actually like, well, we have forests, many of them in North America, but if we cut them down too quickly, the next generation won't have them. We should commercialize our resources, and I agree with that. But we need to do it in a way that is enduring. Then you take President Hoover. His legacy in the environment is really the waterways for commercial purposes. So he said, okay, we'll build a dam, we'll manage the Colorado River Basin, Missouri River Basin, you name it, to help commerce, so commerce can endure. And having a strong economy means we have strong national security. That legacy was continued. Ronald Reagan, Nixon with the EPA, George H.W. Bush with clean air and endangered species, and enshrining more of those rights that were put in place previously. So there's a long tradition of policy, actually, that reminded me, what we're trying to do now in corporate sustainability can really roll up to environmental security, and therefore a very strong national security agenda, which is a point of emphasis for the current administration.
So we went deep real quick, and I'm depressed because we're not getting questions through. So do remember to submit questions, because we want to make sure that your thoughts are heard and questions are answered. But Alex, moving on and talking a little bit about who your intended reader is, and what is it that you want them to take away from the book? And if they could do things differently or better, what do you hope they do differently and better as a result of reading this book?
Yeah. I wrote this book really for three audiences. On the business side, thinking about corporate boards, CEOs, management teams, heads of sustainability. Just show of hands, anyone from the corporate side here? Yeah, very nice representation. On the policy side, people making state-level policies, city-level policies, at the national level as well. And then also on the academic side, both professors and students. On that side of the house, I haven't really spoken to it yet. What was maybe 4 or 5 academic programs not too long ago is now at 180 academic programs in this country related to sustainability. Why? Because there's research that needs to get done that corporations are unwilling or unable to do. We have employers saying, look, I need people in this space, and they're not trained. I think in a generation from now, much like we have engineers with very hard technical skills in their field, and they are prepared to step in day one to solve engineering issues, I think that's the way of the field as well. But so in terms of what do I want from each of these three, from corporates, from policy, from academics, from corporates, let's not look at one reason to stay the course. Let's look at everything. Let's put it on the table. Right? For the first time, again, this is a big shift over the past 10 years, we have so much compliance and regulation, standards to say, okay, we have to do a lot of these things. The estimates range from 600 to 2,400 pieces of legislation, standards, guidance documents that a company needs to think about if you're global. 600 to 2,400. It's a lot. Beyond that, we have a crisis of confidence in insurance. Over the past several years, the average homeowner's insurance has increased by 33%. And that's related to climate. And that's not me saying it, it's the heads of these large companies saying it. Moreover, if you're in Texas, that's more like a 60% increase. If you're in Florida, it's 90%. Why? Because there are actuarial models that calculate the risk, and insurance companies have taken historic losses on the residential side, but on the commercial side too. So we have regulations, we have insurance, we have litigation. What do I mean by litigation? You can be litigated for not disclosing, or not disclosing properly, or for not having proper governance of these risks, where members of corporate boards are being held personally liable for climate damages, right? More of the model, polluters pay. So we have regulation, we have insurance crisis, we have climate litigation risks that are mounting. We also need critical mineral access. And this is where I also pull in policymakers. So given the past week of news, I'm sure we'll talk about it, but there's a great reorientation of global supply chains. And thinking about President Trump's whole of government national security program is to think about things like critical mineral access. And where do critical minerals come from? It's the ground, right? It's our environment. And how do we have access for them for businesses, for high-tech businesses in a way that meets American values. What do I mean by American values? Most Americans, I think everyone in this room would say, we should not have child labor involved in digging up minerals, things like that. Beyond that, I look at supply chain. I look at American values. I look at what are the big companies doing behind the scenes. They might not be out in front, like I started off saying, but they are there behind the scenes continuing the work. When you put all these factors, the sort of like the 10 pillars of the meat of the book, it becomes very challenging, actually, to say, maybe there's room for me to deviate course. Maybe I shouldn't. There is policy sensitivity, 100%, especially when you think about things like stranded assets. But regardless, when you look at all these factors in an objective way, in a nonpartisan way, and allow for some debate, that's truly my goal for all parties involved.
Well, I mean, you're saying some triggering things just based on the questions that we're having come through here on the platform. So let's pause. I'm going to go off script, literally go off script, please, and ask a few questions that come in through the app.
Favorite basketball player? Michael Jordan. I knew that was an easy one.
Easy crowd. I'm British. I don't have a favorite basketball player. I don't really know anything about the game. I've made myself widely unpopular. I'm going to start with a difficult but important question. Mm-hmm. Is it possible that the corporate sustainability movement has already failed? I.e. money and resources spent versus impact, is it a net loss?
What a good question. Have we failed? I think, honestly, this was sort of the reflection I had to do as I started this project. In many ways, we have. And I think we need to come to terms with some of that. You can probably hear it in my voice and voice of Patrick and others. We care about these topics. And sometimes when you take this moral argument, this moral case, because you believe in it so strongly, it almost becomes a horseshoe effect, right? We're so convinced of our side, maybe the righteousness of it. For future generations, we need to protect things and do things, be good stewards. We create this narrative in our head that the other side's anti those things. When really, for me, okay, I can see like on one side it might be, we need to protect our natural resources, our forests, our waterways. But for others, it's, well, how do I get energy at scale that's cheap, that can be transported quickly? The historic reason why we would drill and go to traditional technologies for energy, right? So I think this is where I'm learning too, and I want to be really careful as I think about my cohort here. There's plenty of you, I see your faces, that are leading their companies through this transition to say, what have we gotten wrong? So by stripping some of that away, some of the emotion, the philosophy, the moral platitudes, maybe we can get to a better place and say, let's look at the business facts. Let's look at the facts. Hopefully we can all agree to some baseline here and make a case that way that's a little bit more pragmatic.
And what I would say is I think we're only just getting started. And what I think we're going through at the moment is a transition. I think we saw this era of bold ambition, statement of goals, but without substance behind them. And I think what we're transitioning to now is much more pragmatic, roadmap-based goals, action plans that are really linked to the core of business strategy and what businesses need to do to drive sustainable growth over the long term. So I don't think it's about the goal setting, announcing bold ambition. I think now is when the work is starting to happen and companies are getting serious about how do we link this to our core performance KPIs as a business and to our financial growth, and how do we build resilience over the long run. So I do think you'll see maybe a softening of commitment. You may see a slowdown of work, but I don't think that means that we failed. I think what's happened is that businesses have had to go back and reconcile and really understand, based on a strategic review, what makes sense to continue and what makes sense to stop.
And I think a good bellwether for some of that, too, you bring up a great point, are the largest companies on the planet. What are they doing, right? Because they've litigated these cases internally. And we're talking about companies, like if you take NVIDIA, with, trillion plus in market cap, what does that look like when you compare it to a GDP? That's the size of your home country, the UK. that has massive, massive sway, right? And in some ways, yeah, you could think that they are as complex as a country. Walmart, for instance, having multi-million employees, has a bigger population, or if you compare it to population, it's bigger than Slovenia, right? So these companies are massive, complex, and let's be proud of them too. They are the beating heartbeat of the US economy too. They are, in many ways, the envy of the world, right? Because we have such a strong commercial force in this country. And so when you look at what are they doing right now, that's what I go to as well. What makes sense for big business? And right now, even though, as I started this, they're not necessarily coming out to the fore and saying we must continue. Discreetly, though, they are still committing and advancing a decarbonization strategy. Some of them are admitting, I'd be curious to hear your take on this, the waste reduction. The single-use plastics, that's really hard. We are trying, but we don't have all the answers, right? But I see, especially on the energy side, because that's where there's a lot of economic gain and efficiency to be had, that they're willing to say, look, we have goals, we're committing to them. And so far, we have not seen a large or massive repeal of those. If anything, last year, in anticipation of President Trump coming into office, there were stronger commitments that were actually being made for the S&P 500, for instance, or the Global 2000. So it's a little bit mixed, right? But I look to them as sort of the canary in the coal mine. And there's another but with this moment where energy demand for the first time is increasing. The past 10 years, it was actually going in the other direction. But we have a few mega trends: EVs, data centers, crypto. Those three things really have driven up the demand for energy. So what are we going to do? And especially electricity. And so they're turning towards renewables. They're not creating little coal factories on their campuses. They're looking to renewable energy to do that. And so they're figuring that out. And even, I talk about this in one chapter, AI, to think about how do we do this effectively for energy management and cost reduction.
Yeah, I think the case has been proven that there's value there. It's where's that value and how do you align your strategy specifically to how you extract value out of the customers and consumers or the markets or the people that you look to serve. This is a very contemporary question, and it relates to current tariff policy in the US. So given current events and the impending trade war with China, what do you think the current administration's endgame is, and how do you think that will affect or impact sustainable development in the US?
I want to be careful of hubris here. I have more questions than answers. Where I see a long-term strategy unfolding for the United States, in terms of going back to where I started, national security, I think the whole of government approach is really around China containment. And we went from strategic engagement to strategic competition and saying, we have a number of vulnerabilities here, and how do we course correct for some of them? Endgame is tricky. I'm posing a guess, and I'm eager for other ideas out there. I think maybe an endgame could be we need to rethink critical minerals. We discussed that briefly. Things that go into semiconductors, things that go into phones, electronics, batteries for EVs, right? These are things we need. And how do we onshore not just all manufacturing? I think that's too broad of a brushstroke, because I don't think we could find the workforce to work in textiles, clothing manufacturing, toy manufacturing, but the high-end manufacturing that is a threat to our national security. And why do I think that? Behind the scenes, that is bipartisan. Both parties agree that's necessary. So there's a lot of political will to get that done. To me, that seems pretty core, and we'll see how things play out. I also think the second piece of this is freer trade, actually, with Europe. That can be a way to isolate China. There are many other ideas out there, but for me, that makes the most maybe more pragmatic sense, given the state of U.S. politics.
Do you see it as an opportunity, not a risk, an impact on the U.S.'s ability to lead on sustainable development?
I think that there's both. It's a mixed bag. When we designed global supply chains to be what they are now, it was business ingenuity that said, okay, we have a few design principles. cost. Where's the labor to get this done effectively? Not only from a cost perspective, but there's also willingness, to do the work. And it was designed to optimize for a few things as we reshuffle. And companies might not actually have to reshuffle at the end of the day. But if there is a reshuffling of hard physical assets, buildings, right? Where are they making things? The capital assets? Well, we might design for something else. We might throw in energy efficiency. How do you bake in decarbonization into how you do those things? How do you think about social policy, where you're, again, looking for minerals or energy resources? How do we do that in new or different ways? So with the reshuffling, we could invite different conversations than we've done in the past that will add and protect from reputational risk, that can take off cost, that can create agility too from a multi-sourcing perspective. So I think there's a number of things there. Ultimately though, I do think the environmental security can be interwoven into that, which would then help on the national security front.
So perhaps in summary then, the opportunity is to really fuel short-term economic growth, but sustain that over the long term by doubling down on sustainable innovation and really securing those critical resources, right, that, let's be honest, are being traded pretty rapidly around the world at the moment. And I think that's what's up for grabs is, as you see that resource pool deplete, you want to make sure that you have access to the critical supply you need to maintain social cohesion, but also continue to drive economic growth, economic empowerment, job opportunity in the US. So, international security, but domestic security and opportunity and economic fuel, I think, is really up for grabs at the moment.
And I think we just still need to be clear-eyed. Like when you look at Apple's supply chain, that's the company, what are they really going to do? I heard an estimate yesterday on Bloomberg. If they spent $10 billion in 3 years, only 10% of their supply chain could be reshored. And that's them trying to look for every easy option. So you see the complexity there. And corporate boards, they don't want sunk costs, right? I think some of this, the complexity of it, is overwhelming to me. And that's where I don't think there's thinking about global companies. Coca-Cola sells in 200 countries. Mondelez, how many countries are you operating in?
150. I think the rumor is you'd have more than 6 feet away from a Coca-Cola. I don't know if that's true.
Yeah.
The kind of the less polished article I read today, which was appalling from a climate perspective, is that apparently Apple chartered 5 planes to bring iPhones into the country to try and avoid the tariff impositions. But anyway, we won't dwell too much on that, just to bring some levity. But Alex, and I talked about this in my opening, we'll go back to script now, but we will take questions. Like I say, we're going to pivot to Q&A in about 5 minutes. But there's a couple more questions I want to ask. One is, I think, what you've done with the book that I find inherently valuable is you've created a coherent and usable framework for sustainability professionals like me to use and deploy to sustain development of our programs and our impact over the long term. Talk to me a little bit about the structure quickly and why you structured the book the way you did.
Yeah, I realize, this book turned out a little bit longer than I thought it would be. My goal is just to get it out as quickly as possible to meet this moment, right? Because I was worried if this book were to come out in the fall, it'd be too late. A lot of these decisions would be made, and we wouldn't have this forum to really debate them in a meaningful way. Being really clear-eyed and pragmatic, it's like, okay, there's some context up front saying what's the lay of the land? What is environmental security? What is the current strategy of our administration? With a lot of respect, too. What is the angle on China? And what about the rise of populism, right? That factors in here, especially for global companies. A lot has shifted. Last year, 65 countries went to the polls. And the headline, incumbents lost their jobs. It was not a good year for incumbents. So that was sort of a let's lay the land. But the meat of the book is really these 10 pillars. And it's a choose your own adventure. I don't expect people to read cover to cover. If you do, I'll buy you dinner, thank you. But it's sort of, there's something there for everyone. I would say the regulation is there for everyone. It applies, right? And it's not just at federal levels, it's at state levels too. And even beyond that. The insurance question, When I had the opportunity, I was doing due diligence, and I was actually talking to those who are setting up the National Energy Dominance Council that's being set up. And I asked, for some feedback on these ideas as well, in terms of what do you see as a future energy mix? What about this technology? What about that? Because it's important for me to engage with the administration as well, to show respect and understanding of the position. When I asked, so what are you all going to do about insurance? I know it's not related necessarily to the energy question, but what about insurance? And you know what? That's a good question, actually. I'm not sure if we have the right answer. So to me, that would, belong. It's pertinent to everyone. When you think about litigation risk, every company is facing that. So again, that's for everyone. But questions like AI, supply chains, there's something there that if it's pertinent to your business or to your organization, you can jump right into that chapter. And there are certain business books that I actually quite hate, where it's just do these 2 things and life will be solved. You can work 4 hours a week. You can retire next year. They promise everything. And it's gosh, I'm so tired of them. So I won't pretend I have all the answers. That's the other thing too. And, I actually learned that from a lot of people in this room, to come with some humility. And so at the end of each chapter, what I offer is prompt for debate that hopefully starts in neutral territory that people can take to their organizations and saying, okay, I'm hearing a lot about litigation risk. Maybe we can focus on that chapter and focus on these questions and build that middle ground. And how do we do it? What do I even mean by middle ground? Well, I'm actually so excited because I think we can all do it. And in a world that is more and more polarized and isolated and lonely, I was actually thinking about this. We're all actually trained to do this. So we've all watched, Game of Thrones, Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings. I know I have my team members love that one. But when you do that, actually, you have a contract with the director, you as a viewer, to say, I'm going to suspend my disbelief. I'm just going to sit back and relax for a couple hours and say, you know what? I'm willing to play by your rules. I'm willing to listen and say, wait, I can't zap you with this wand, or, I'm willing to just let me be zapped by a wand. Okay, fine. So what if we apply that same skill that we learned to have since kids, to say, instead of suspending my disbelief, what if I'm able to suspend my belief? And that's also what I'm looking to do here. And so the questions try to reflect that.
Conversation is my takeaway. Final question. If you could encourage your readership to take one courageous, bold call to action, what would that call to action be? And the same to the folk that have joined us kindly in the room tonight as well.
Yeah, well, I'm going to throw a bone to Chicago with this one, my hometown. We are a city that is remarkably visionary. In the 1840s, when we were founded, this place was a swamp, right? And we called ourselves, our motto is city in a garden, right? It's not because of what we were, but what we aspired to be. And that humption, that remarkable ingenuity, resilience. When our city was devastated by the fire in 1871, and I know you know this, people thought, especially in the East Coast, okay, Chicago's had its moment. We'll focus on St. Louis, or maybe it's Cleveland, in the western frontier. But actually, it was the business community of this city that rallied and said, look, this is a generational business opportunity. Let's innovate. And we haven't really talked about this, but let's innovate. And with the technology that was in place at that time, most of the city was largely rebuilt in 2 years. And they had wider boulevards. We have alleys. Sorry, New York, you don't, right? There's things that happen. We have better sanitation for it. We built the skyscraper. We think big, right? And so to me, the need to innovate brings me to this field. The body of knowledge we have is this big. It needs to be this big. Otherwise, we would have solved this problem. So I want to invite people in. I want to debate.
Alex, are you telling us to build back better? Are you bringing that back? So I couldn't resist.
Yeah, well, fair. But, I think there's so much to look forward to here and really good answers we can all sink our teeth into. And I'm excited to do it. So let's get to work.
I think that's a great way to end our Q&A. Now we're going to pivot to you all, and we've got a queue. So, form and orderly, but we'll go with our chappie here at the front. And sorry, I don't know your name, but please go ahead and position your question.
Now you do know my name is Tom.
Hello, Tom.
Thanks to both of you. And I'll continue a little bit of levity. I never thought in my lifetime I would have the opportunity to complain about the Oreo packaging where the flap, you lift it up and down a few times. Yeah, the glue wears off and then the Oreos go stale. Help me, please.
It works fantastically well to keep them fresh, and it does consist of eating them within 24 hours. But on behalf of my company, I apologize. We'll work on it, sir. But Tom, please go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, my question is, sustainability can be expensive. And corporations, including the ones I work for, are always looking at the lowest cost ways to doing things. And sustainability a lot of times is mandated, as you said, through regulations, through lawsuits and the like. What tools, if any, are available to compel corporations to voluntarily promulgate sustainability practices?
Yeah, what a good question. Usually in corporate sustainability, we think about initiatives that are voluntary or non-voluntary. Not always, but that tends to be a way of thinking about things. And on the voluntary basis, again, let's be realistic about where we are. And this makes more sense industry to industry. If your industry, and I'm curious to hear, Patrick, from your point of view on this one especially, is really being hit hard by inflationary pressures, by potential, tariffs, things like that, oftentimes sustainability is the first thing to go. Let's be real. So how do we make the business case for certain things where there are cost-saving opportunities? It's something we think about all the time. And when you use, let's say, AI for decarbonization of buildings, we're amazed, actually, that you can still save a lot on money. It's not all the time, though. And it's your time horizon. You might not save this year, but you'll save over 5 or 10. So right now, quarter 1, quarter 2, it's rocky on the voluntary basis. People are reassessing. But I pose the question, how do you think about the S questions, the social questions, the environmental questions, the security questions, alongside things like cost cutting? I don't have all the answers, but that's how I'd like to pose the question. And that's the prompt I take to boardrooms.
And I'll add, Tom, I think it's a great question. I would put my hand up, and I think the profession would, and say we've not always done a good job of linking sustainability to business value. But I do think that's the transition that's underway at the moment. And what we do at Mondelez is really think about how we embed sustainability into our strategy, but then how do we use it as a lever to drive value creation? So how do we use it to cut through with consumers in markets that have high consumer awareness of environmental issues? How do we use it as a way of minimizing operational or financial risk in markets that have been heavily disrupted by adverse weather events? So I think it's all about being smart enough to not just drive based on this sense of purpose and doing what's right, but being able to link it to the core metrics that the business measures success against and shareholders measure success against, and being able to explain using fact and data how sustainability can be a driver of growth, and then being able to grab tangible metrics to show that payback. And we're still working on that. I think it's, pardon the pun, but it's kind of like, it's a journey, but I do think that's where the profession is getting smarter, and that's what will fuel kind of the next wave of action that you'll see from corporates and probably from the public sector as well. But thank you for the great question. I'm going to turn to our next question asker in the room, and then we'll take some online.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having this talk. It's really very insightful, and the many, many subjects that this room covers all around. I think my question today is really towards you, sir, as it has to do with Mondelez. So you mentioned that you're invested in over 150 countries. One of those countries is Russia. Mondelez is famous for being one of the few American countries left that has not divested out of Russia, despite the war and ongoing war crimes. Matter of fact, you went from having about 900 million in revenue from Russia to almost doubling it to you're reaching 1.5 billion. in revenue from Russia. So my question to you is, what kind of sustainability is your corporation and maybe you personally considering in the future? For example, just 6 days ago, Russia hit with a ballistic missile a playground, killed 9 children, overall 20 killed, 72 wounded. You pay $63 million US dollars in taxes to Russia that undoubtedly go towards those missiles. Unfortunately, Ukrainian children aren't going to be around to see that sustainable future that you guys are working towards. So I'm curious to hear about that. Thank you.
Yeah, and it's a very sensitive topic, and appreciate you kind of raising the concerns. I personally can't talk to it. I'm just not involved in that level of decision making in our company, but I can certainly point you to the right resources in our company. And thank you for being brave enough to raise the question. Sir.
Yeah, imagine each missile that explodes, the carbon footprint of that missile, and thousands of them together. That's national security issue. The more national security, the bigger carbon footprint, if you believe that. But my question is, the middle ground is a beautiful word, and you define it beautifully. You suspend your disbelief, I suspend my belief. But practically, how do you do that? Because this democracy is winner takes all. 51% takes all, 49% go home until next time. So that by nature polarizes the society. So in practice on the ground, when rubber meets the ground, how do you do a middle ground? For example, specifically the climate change, it's a climate issue. One side believes human activity causes climate change. Therefore, there's carbon footprint, all this stuff. But the other side says global warming has nothing to do with the human activity, or very little. How do you make a common ground between these two? To me, like, there's no common ground. You can talk common ground all you want, but at the end of the day, mine is the common ground, which is the mainstream narrative is human activity causes global warming. So what's the common ground here? Yeah. How?
Thank you. Yeah. I love this provocative question. And this was meant to be debate. So, let's have real questions here. I think before a couple years ago, it might be hard to answer your question, honestly, right? Because I would say my ground is the middle ground, right? Even a couple years ago, if I'm trying to be very self-aware. But I think in this room, we can trust financial markets. I think the middle ground are the big titans of insurance. They're the ones assessing financial risk on the ground. They're not the ones debating, saying, hey, pointing fingers, it was you guys over there who caused all of this with emissions. They don't care. They actually really don't care. A lot of them have left the Net Zero Insurance Alliance, to be clear. What they care about, though, is making money. So when insurance last year had to write off $124 billion last year alone, past 4 or 5 years, that's over, estimates range from 600 million to $1 trillion in our country, and that's just insured losses. They can't afford to keep doing what they're doing. So if we look at trails from financial markets, my hope is let's start with financial data from large companies that are trusted entities that we buy from and say, what are they doing, actually? And if we look at that common set of data, you still might have a different opinion, and I welcome that. I think that's part of an honest debate, but maybe we start there, and that's the first point of entry.
But I think it's a great comment. I think all good debate starts with sound fact and data, and then you can take it from there, and probably don't want to get into an existential debate over whether climate change is human-driven or not. I feel like the scientists have maybe put that debate to bed. But thank you very much for raising the question. It's a very good point. I'm going to take an online question now because I want to be fair to our audience that's watching us online. So countries are ready to sacrifice environment to make products cheap, stack them high and sell them low in the US. Are we not shipping out our jobs and important carbon-embodied products? Won't the current policies actually help with our environmental security?
Yeah, I think especially in Europe, they've recognized where we make things can matter if we're looking to lower carbon emissions. For the first time, Europe has proposed an import tax on carbon, effectively. And many are advocating for a global carbon tax. That's much harder. We could spend hours debating that topic. But right now, there's actually It's called the CBAM out of Europe, which says a lot of companies have maybe gamed the system a little bit. And that's not to say it's bad necessarily, but they're saying, oh, if I produce somewhere else, I can emit as needed, work through a partner in my supply chain, and then have the goods that I want to sell in a place like Europe. But now Europe is saying, actually, we need to account for all of those things. So it's evolving very dynamically. At the same time, what's interesting, we all need to follow this. Europe is under a lot of pressure to be more competitive. And what do we mean by that? The current administration is saying scrap some of this environmental stuff. So we'll see. There's policy sensitivity, and we'll have to see if it endures. I do think it would, but let's see.
Great. One additional question online, and then we'll come to the lady at the front of the queue for the mic. But how strong a voice do sustainability leaders have within a large corporation's structure? And I'll pass that to you first, and then I can give a personal reflection on that.
Well, I think it can be tricky. Right now, it's a newer role, right? Maybe it's really over the past 10 years or so. And there's always been heads of, environmental safety and different things. But there's no pathway. What I would love to see one day is maybe a large multinational that is resource extractive or really energy dependent, source their CEO from the head of sustainability. We haven't seen something quite like that yet. I understand there needs to be a business case for those skills. But I'm looking to see, where do people go in that field? There needs to be deep expertise. And then also, I don't think we've known how to position these roles. A couple years back, there was a delegation from the State Department that was bringing together high-tech companies. And we met in San Francisco. And I said, how do we propagate climate tech globally? And Salesforce was generous enough to host the event. But he kind of lost me. And again, I'm all in on this stuff. But he lost me by opening up and saying, my CEO is planet Earth. Again, there's nothing wrong necessarily with believing that or being very, very passionate. But no, it's Benioff, right? It's like, you have a boss, you have your KPIs, you need to deliver on what you're doing. You got to leave some of those things for at home or the cocktail lounge, something, right? So that's where I think we are working on, how do we create a pathway to promotion for this role? And how do we revitalize that function to not just be considered a cost center? What do you see?
I mean, I think the voice of sustainability is strengthening. I think there is still growth. I think there's two things that need to happen. It goes back to Tom's question, right? You need to have that practical case for investment, and you need to be able to demonstrate an ROI. And I think you need to start to broaden out the soft skill set of the sustainability leader, right? So you've got deep technical expertise in how to drive sustainability as a program, but how do you then translate that into common business language where, quite frankly, the board and the exec team care? Because they're not going to entertain a conversation from a purist about technically why this is the right thing to do and how to do it. They want to know, with common business language, why does this make sense for us to invest in now, and how does it help us deliver on our short, mid, long-term plans? So I think it varies. It depends on the strength of your value proposition, and it depends on the strength of your character. But I think there's lots of people out there that are agitating, making lots of noise, and driving really strong progress. And with that, I'll come to the lady at the front.
Congratulations, Alex. I can't wait to read your book. So my question, you said that you address also academics. I am an academic, I am a scientist, and I work in matters related to sustainability. And I think that, all the companies agree, have embraced it. But what is really terrifying for me is that this country has developed the best scientists, the best sustainability experts in the world, and has been doing it historically. And now we are at a point in which our government basically wants to destroy academic research, a high-level academic environment. And how can then we be dominant if we are not training the next generation? I mean, I feel very scared about it in my role as a scientist, but also as an educator.
Thank you for that, Laura. I don't think there's a good answer, one that I, could come up with that would satiate what you're looking for. There is fear, and rightfully so. I mean, there are certain institutions that are being handpicked to say, your funding's over. Northwestern, almost 800 million. Princeton was announced, from NOAA, cuts today for 220 million because it propagated climate anxiety. And that's not okay. There's not consistent rules right now. But I think if there's freedom for debate anywhere, I went first for academia in this country, right? That's why I'm trying to engage in this type of conversation in a pragmatic way. I don't know how universities under these circumstances, and I'd be curious to see if you've seen this before, dip into endowments to sustain research for these sort of things. I see Chris shaking his head. He would know. He would know. So I don't know how do you solve for those financial crises right now. And it's a shame. There is this concept in economics called the entrepreneurial state. ARPA-E was funded to have enduring research. And again, something that I've learned from you, Terry and Chris, you need research to be sustained for decades to get meaningful results. And we're sort of hamstringing ourselves and our own competitiveness from an R&D standpoint for countries like China and our own military, right? Those were a lot of those breakthroughs go through first, actually. So I wish I had a better answer for you, but I hope to spark debate. And I hope we can use this as a safe way at a university level to say, should we stay the course? And how do we in an academic setting?
And what I would say is I think there's a lot of commercial and innovation potential in that collective brain power. So don't scrub it on the basis of ideology. Just seems like daft policy as far as I'm concerned, and seems inconsistent with the direction that the US has been on. So I think with time and with rational discussion and debate on a bipartisan level, hopefully that fear will dissipate and we'll see regrowth of that sector. But I feel like this is going to be a huge source for commercial progress over the next 50, 60, 70 years. And it just seems like it would be the wrong decision to start to regress on that when you've made such incredible progress. And thank you as well for the great work that you and your colleagues continue to do. Please.
Thank you for the talk. My question is, we're obviously in this period of great uncertainty. We have the current administration's trade policy may be causing companies to reorient their views on their position on sustainability and how and where they're developing products, and Apple shipping product as quickly as possible out of China. And then you also have blue states and mayors of blue cities that are reacting to the administration and who have vowed to uphold their policies that they view as consistent with their values. So I'm curious about if you have thoughts on how, or general advice for, those of us in the corporate world on how to navigate this shifting landscape and the tensions that we're seeing from one market to another, one jurisdiction to another, and the different types of regulations that are, maybe unfolding.
Yeah, I would actually just, before I pass it over to Alex, what I would share from a Mondelez perspective, right? There's two things businesses don't like. One is uncertainty, and we're living in a really uncertain world. And the other is a rich tapestry of disconnected national or state level policies. And I'm in packaging. This has devolved to the state. You've got 6 states in the US that have passed EPR, extended producer responsibility bills, another 10 negotiating those. None of them look, feel, sound, smell the same. That creates complexity, that creates costs, that disadvantages businesses, and at the state level, it disadvantages local economies as well. So I think that global cohesion on policy frameworks is really critical because that gives businesses certainty, but it also empowers them with one single framework and global consistency, which allows them to be more productive. But Alex, that was my kind of soapbox piece.
No, I think this is a soapbox moment because that's all we have. We don't have the answers right now. When we think about risk, though, especially at a board level, management team level, that's going to have to change. When we looked at political risk, that was maybe quarterly if you were doing a really good job with it. Because political risk used to mean, I have people working in Kazakhstan and there's a conflict, let me get my people out. That's what political risk used to mean, actually. And now, it's the uncertainty. My daughter, who's 4, her favorite new buzzword, corporates might think it's poopy, right? Because uncertainty is the worst thing ever if you want to have a good return on your investment. All the markets, equities markets, treasuries, commodities, and none of them like what's happening right now. And so my hope with that is we can't really undermine the full global economy. Like something's got to give. And soon, otherwise we are headed for recession, we're headed for isolation, and that's getting bleaker as I keep, pontificating here. So I hope, though, going back to its risk, broadening that sense of risk, using tools like AI, like Microsoft is leading edge because they have the AI technology to do so, but I hope that to be commercialized to pull from more data on a more frequent basis. So we'll have to stay tuned.
Great question. As my therapist would tell me to do, I'm going to take the one positive reason to leave and be thankful for what's to come. And I think what, Alex, you have created in this book is a framework that gives me the confidence that we can actually break through some of the political discourse and carve a path for progress. And I think this work is essential. I think what you're doing is fantastic. I'm inspired by the fact that you stood up, were courageous, and decided to write a book instead of do what I do, which is rant about it when I look in the bathroom mirror every morning, and what I would do differently, but don't have the boldness to share that publicly. So if you could all join me in thanking Alex.
Thank you.
And I'm sorry to those whose questions